Andrew Jackson, born in 1767 in North Carolina, was our seventh president. His extensive political career is what helped him become elected in office and be a part of shaping America into what it is today. Jackson thought of America as an ideal society whose political system was almost a perfect balance between individual liberty, equality, and social stability. He was determined to be an advocate for more liberty and political power to the white man, including the right to vote and hold office positions. He was a firm supporter of majority rule, popular vote, slave ownership, and against women's rights, the banking system, and the Electoral College. In 1795, Jackson was elected to the Tennessee Constitutional Convention. The following year, elected to represent Tennessee in the House of Representatives on the committee to examine methods for determining post offices and post roads for Ways and Means. In 1797, he was elected to the United States Senate by Tennessee legislature. In 1802, Jackson was commissioned Major General of the Tennessee Militia, where he would lead troops into a victory in the War of 1812 against both the Indians and British. In 1821, he was appointed governor of Florida when Spain gave the U.S. territory ownership of it. The next year, he was nominated as president, but was not elected, but was elected to U.S. Senate over foreign relation and military affairs. Finally, in 1829, Jackson took office as president as what later became a Democrat. Henry Clay, born in 1777 in Hanover County, Virginia, may not have been a president, but was just as influential in our history. He stood for a larger, more peaceful government that could improve America. He became the leader of the Whig Party and represented those who welcomed the market revolution. He firmly supported powerful economic institutions that would stimulate hard work, education, and self-control of the people. He believed internal improvements such as canals, turnpikes, and railroads allowed farmers and manufacturers faster travel time so they could sell products for a lower price. He believed Congress should have broad powers to encourage economic development by subsidizing internal improvements, recharting banks, and imposing tariffs on imports. He dedicated his career to preserving the Union and promoting its development and wanted America to be richer, wiser, kinder, and technologically advanced. Clay's political career began in 1803 when he was elected to the Kentucky State Legislature and 3 years later sent to the United States Senate. In 1804, he was elected to Speaker of the House in the House of Representatives. In 1821, he was the author of the Second Missouri Compromise. 3 years later, Clay was appointed Secretary of State. After a few years, Clay hung up his political hat and returned to farming and law. Henry Clay was most famous for his American System policy, a policy to raise tariffs, keep prices of land high, and use proceeds to plan and construct a national system of internal improvement.
Andrew Jackson's political career was quite different from Henry Clay's. While Jackson did try to have a career in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, he was unhappy in what he deemed Federalist Philadelphia and resigned. Jackson was a man of morals, honor, and simplicity, and he believed in having a democracy centralized around the power of the people, and felt that democracy would suffer from the coming of the market revolution. He viewed institutions such as banks and corporations as corruptible, and believed that society was already ideal. Jackson became known for his victories against British forces, as well as his triumphs over Native Americans. His natural talents as a fantastic leader began to surface after he was elected as Major General of the 2nd Division of Tennessee in 1802. When threats against the U.S. began to surface in 1812, Tennessee Governor Willie Blount made Jackson commander of state troops that were being called to defend New Orleans. Jackson was instructed to disband and return home by the Secretary of War, but was soon back in the field after Creek Indians attacked Fort Mims in Alabama. After leading his troops to a decisive victory against the Creek Indian attacks, President James Madison was convinced that Jackson could be an effective military leader and gave Jackson command of all U.S. troops in the Southwest. Jackson was successful in leading his troops to victory against British forces in New Orleans after rallying the troops together. The victory was again astonishing, with casualties of U.S. troops being just 71 to over 2,000 British soldiers. Word spread quickly of Jackson's victories, and Americans were ecstatic. In a time where the nation was weak, Jackson and his men had restored glory and honor to the Republic. In the aftermath of the War of 1812, surviving Creek Indians had fled to Spanish Florida to be with the Seminoles, and in 1817, Jackson was ordered by newly elected President James Monroe to protect the Georgia frontier from the threats of these natives, as well as armed runaway slaves. In Spanish Florida, Jackson caught and hung the natives, killed 2 British subjects he believed were assisting the Creek Indians, and seized the towns of St. Marks and Pensacola. His actions did stir a small controversy in Washington, but Jackson was not punished for his actions. He proved that the U.S. could capture Florida at any time, and in 1819, Spain sold Florida to the U.S. Henry Clay was adamant in his belief that what Jackson did was out of line, and pled his case to Congress, but Americans never wavered in their feelings towards Jackson. He was a revered war hero that conquered the enemies of America and restored honor and glory in a time when diplomacy seemed to falter. Many voters believed Washington was full of corrupt politicians, and Jackson was the face to change that.
Henry Clay was a strong advocate of just and fair practices within the confines of the Constitution. Although he said, "I too hate them, from my very soul I abominate them," when talking about the Native Americans in a speech to Congress, he followed that statement by saying, "But I love my country and its Constitution. I love liberty and safety and fear military despotism more even than I hate these monsters." Henry Clay had the intelligence and common sense to separate his own desires from the welfare of the nation. And while Andrew Jackson went into Spanish Florida to unjustly kill Native Americans, he only laid partial blame on Jackson. Henry Clay was well-spoken and a master negotiator, whose words could calm any situation. He believed not in blaming solely one man, but all of those who were responsible for the Treaty of Fort Jackson. If it weren't for Clay's level-headedness, an all-out war with Spain and Native Americans would have been inevitable. Clay reminded Congress during his speech not to act like the great empires of Rome and Greece that were admired but did not last. He reminded them that America was still in its infancy and that to proceed without caution would be a disaster.
In the 2 documents on the Seminole War and excerpt on Indian removal, Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson talk about the removal of natives and their thoughts about it. They both feel differently about the situation. In Clay's document on the Seminole War, he talks about how he feels Jackson is trying to violate the laws of the country and how having the natives kicked out will be taking away their liberty. While in Jackson's document, excerpt on Indian removal, he talks about how they should kick out the natives because they're violating the law of the land by creating their own government and a state. In the Constitution, it states that no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state. Because of that, he felt that the natives should emigrate beyond Mississippi or submit to the laws of the land. Even though both Clay and Jackson didn't like natives, they both had different views on what should happen to the natives. Both Jackson and Clay used the Constitution as an argument, but Clay saw it as we were taking away their liberty, while Jackson saw them as violating the Constitution by wanting to start their own government within a state.